Think about just scrolling through your feed or maybe that little pang you get seeing someone's new car, their vacation pics. Why do we care so much? Why does it feel like we're always trying to keep up? Well, today we're looking for answers in a pretty surprising place, actually. Over a century ago, we're doing a deep dive into Thorstein Veblen's really groundbreaking work, The Theory of the Leisure Class. It first came out way back in 1899, and our mission really is to unpack Veblen's critique. It's biting, very insightful, and it just meticulously dissects how consumption, status, class, how all that shapes society. His analysis is sharp, often kind of satirical, and he gave us concepts like conspicuous consumption, which honestly feels startlingly relevant today. I think as we go, you'll see how his observations, well, they still hit home, big time. So let's get into it. Veblen talks about this leisure class. Where did that idea even originate? What are the roots of a group that basically doesn't need to work?
Yeah, Veblen traces it way back to the earliest forms of social organization. Think about, like, primitive societies. Prestige wasn't about money then. It was about raw power, strength, skill in warfare, hunting prowess. And over time, that physical dominance kind of morphed into economic dominance. And right there, you see the first signs of a class that was essentially freed from the need for productive labor. They just didn't have to work anymore.
Okay, and central to this whole theory is his idea of pecuniary emulation. That's a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically that lower classes want to look like the upper classes, not copy their values, but just the outward signs of wealth.
Exactly. That desire to imitate it fuels this whole cycle of consumption. It becomes less about whether something is actually useful and much more about just its display. Think about upgrading your phone. Is it because the old one is broken? Or is it because the new model says, hey, I'm current, I'm successful? It's less about making calls, really.
Right, it's a signal. So it's not just having the money, but this really deep-seated drive to show it, to mimic the people at the top.
But okay, if you're trying to look like you don't need to work, how do you actually do that? I mean, beyond just having cash.
Well, that's where Veblen brings in conspicuous leisure. It's exactly what it sounds like. A visible, obvious demonstration that you don't need to engage in productive work. He saw it everywhere in his time, from idle aristocrats lounging around to purely ceremonial kings. It's all about having that freedom from labor and making darn sure everybody else sees it.
So it's not just having the free time, but making it visible,
Yeah.
like the influencer posting from a private jet, maybe, or the celebrity taking months off to backpack somewhere exotic. It's flexing your time, not just your wallet.
Precisely. The activity itself, often not the point. The real point is the statement it makes. I have disposable time. I don't need to be earning a living right now. And that display, it becomes this powerful form of social currency. But just showing you have free time, that alone isn't enough, is it? What's the next step?
The even more famous one in this whole status display game.
Yeah. That would definitely be conspicuous consumption. This is the big one. It's the act of spending money on things, not because they're useful or necessary, but specifically because they signify status. Think diamonds, designer clothes, maybe those super luxury cars. The sheer costliness of the item becomes its main virtue. The harder it is for others to get, the more valuable it is as a marker of your class.
So it's not about what the thing does, it's about what owning it says about you. Like, I don't know, that huge SUV that clearly never goes off-road but costs a fortune.
Spot on. And Veblen pointed out how this behavior isn't just at the very top. It filters down the social ladder. The middle classes, even the working classes, they start mimicking these patterns as best they can, often stretching their budgets, just to keep up that illusion of being higher status than they are. And the result, as Veblen saw it, is a society that becomes kind of addicted to showmanship, to appearances over substance. Now, Veblen also looked at specific roles within this system. What did he observe about the role of women, particularly upper-class women, in this whole framework?
Right. Veblen observed that in the patriarchal societies he was looking at, women often ended up functioning as, well, status symbols for their husbands or fathers. Their role wasn't primarily to be productive in an economic sense, but more to embody the man's success. So they'd be decorated, dressed in expensive clothes, kept away from any kind of manual or productive labor. Their beauty, their poise, their fashion sense, all these become emblems of the household's wealth and standing.
That's a really potent observation, and parts of it still feel, well, they still resonate, don't they? But do you think his view, coming from 1899, fully captures how complex women's roles are today, with careers, different family setups?
Oh, it's definitely a lens from his specific time and place, no question. But that core idea that women's appearance or activities could be used to display a household's wealth and status, You can still see echoes of that today, absolutely, even if the dynamics are much, much more complicated now. He was critiquing that reduction of women to essentially objects of status display. And in that sense, yeah, his analysis definitely foreshadows some modern feminist critiques about linking femininity with, say, passivity or just being ornamental.
Okay. Veblen also made this really crucial distinction within the economy itself, between business and industry. What did he mean by that?
Yeah, this is key to his critique. He defined industry as basically the actual making of things, producing goods and services that meet real human needs. It's about creating tangible value, the technical side of things. But he contrasted that sharply with business. For Veblen, business was primarily about the pursuit of profit. And often he argued the pursuit of profit was actually at odds with genuine productivity or the goals of industry.
So industry is like the engineer designing the bridge, maybe the farmer growing the food, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Real production.
But business, in Veblen's view, is more like the financier betting on the bridge project or
Okay.
the speculator trying to corner the market on that food.
You've got it. He saw business people, especially those in the leisure class, as often less interested in the actual creation of value and more interested in manipulating markets, leveraging financial power, maybe engaging in speculation. Their goal wasn't necessarily efficiency or meeting needs. It was financial gain, market dominance. And because of this, Veblen argued that the leisure class, through its business practices, often becomes, well, parasitic.
Parasitic, wow.
Yeah. Essentially living off the productive labor of the industrial classes while contributing little of practical value themselves. He didn't mince words.
No, he really didn't pull any punches there. Okay, so how did he see big institutions like education or even religion fitting into this class system he was describing?
Well, he argued they often play a role in perpetuating these distinctions, too. Take education. Veblen critiqued how school systems, especially higher education, don't just impart knowledge. They also reinforce status. Think about all the formalities, the traditions, the exclusive networks. For Veblen, pursuing higher education, particularly in fields without immediate practical application, could become a form of conspicuous leisure. It signals that you have the time, the resources, to pursue learning that isn't directly tied to earning a living. The prestige of certain universities, for instance, might be tied more to their exclusivity in history than just the raw quality of education.
Okay, that makes sense. And religion, how did that fit in?
Similarly, he saw religious observance, especially when it involved elaborate rituals, expensive buildings, or large donations, as another form of conspicuous activity. For some participants, he suggested it might be less about deep personal faith and more about social conformity, about showing up, being seen, donating large sums to the church, all things that enhance one's social standing within that community. It becomes another way to display status.
What's really fascinating, I think, is how Veblen connected things you might not normally link, like sports, to these core ideas about status and showing off.
Yes, exactly. He saw the glorification of sport and heroism, even back then, as a kind of modern echo of really archaic values, like competitive sports mirror the emphasis on fighting prowess you saw in primitive societies. Athletes become these sort of modern-day warriors.
And the fans, when we get super invested in our teams, is that like getting prestige by association? My team won, so I feel like a winner.
That's precisely Veblen's point. That intense fandom, the tribalism around sports teams, it reflects these deeper social drives we have for affiliation, for symbolic dominance, even if it's vicarious. And this connects to what he termed the institutionalization of idleness, where being non-productive, being separate from manual labor, actually becomes baked into the system as a mark of honor. People end up being judged not just by what they do, but by how effectively they can display their separation from necessary work.
So you mean like a high-level executive position, maybe lots of meetings, a big office, a fancy title, but the actual tangible output might be debatable, but the status is undeniable. That's idleness getting institutionalized.
That's a perfect example. Veblen would point to jobs in the upper levels of management, finance, even government, where prestige is high, but the actual hands-on work might be minimal. The titles, the offices, the ceremonies surrounding these roles all reinforce this illusion of importance, even if, from a purely productive standpoint, they might create inefficiencies.
Okay, so if everyone's caught in this cycle, trying to emulate those above them, trying to outdo each other,
Oh,
what did Veblen think the consequences were for society as a whole?
well, he basically warned that a society driven purely by this kind of emulation is unsustainable. He famously called it a race with no finish line. Consumption starts to wildly outpace actual utility or need,
Hmm.
and social cohesion can start to fray because everyone's just focused on individual status talking. Plus, there's this inherent problem. It leads to perpetual dissatisfaction because the value of these status symbols rests on their exclusivity.
Right, the moment everyone else can afford it or has it.
Exactly. It loses its power as a status marker.
Yeah.
So you always need the next new thing, the next level up.
It really is a perpetual status race, isn't it? The finish line just keeps moving further away. That really explains why we seem to constantly chase the newest fashion, the latest tech, maybe even the trendiest vacation spot.
That's the cycle. Veblen saw it leading to this constant state of dissatisfaction, which is only temporarily masked by novelty, by the churn of fashion cycles.
So Veblen was obviously very critical. Did he offer any kind of vision for what might come next, or maybe what a better society might look like in his view?
He did, actually. While he was deeply critical, he tended to view the dominance of the leisure class as a specific historical phase, one that wasn't necessarily permanent. He seemed hopeful that it might eventually give way to a more rational, more productive, perhaps more egalitarian social structure down the line. His implied hope was for a future where status wouldn't be tied to just consuming things, but to genuine contribution, where, say, engineers, scientists, artists, thinkers, the people actually making things or creating knowledge would be more valued than financiers or speculators. In that kind of society, conspicuous consumption might be replaced by something like conspicuous efficiency or conspicuous contribution.
Conspicuous efficiency. I like that. And connecting all this to the bigger picture, Veblen's ideas just feel incredibly current, don't they? I mean, you look around today, influencers flaunting luxury lifestyles online, the sheer power of designer brands, the constant focus on celebrity culture, even just how we perform our lives on social media. It feels like Veblen absolutely nailed it over 120 years ago. His work really gives you this powerful framework, this lens to understand why we buy what we buy, maybe why we follow who we follow online, and why society often seems so obsessed with symbols, with appearances, rather than, substance.
Absolutely. Veblen's work doesn't really offer easy solutions. There's no simple fix for these deep-seated patterns, but it absolutely offers a powerful way to see the world around you differently. And maybe, just maybe, seeing it differently is the first step towards changing things.
That's a great point. And maybe something for you, the listener, to think about as well. How do these Veblen-esque patterns, this signaling, show up in your own life or in your community? Are there maybe habits of consumption or even ambitions we hold that are more about signaling status than about genuine need or substance? How much of our own identity feels tied up in what we own versus maybe what we do or create? And what might it look like if that balance shifted? Lots to think about there. And if you're keen to dive even deeper into Veblen's actual text or explore other really fascinating topics like this, we definitely recommend checking out Audible. There's a link right below in the description where you can get your first month free. It gives you access to a huge range of audiobooks and